Hello and welcome to another Scratchcast. I'm your host, Scratchpoint. You will like me until I piss you off. And I'm here with my co-host, Makiten, and we're here. We're not genderqueer. Get used to it. All right, so today we're going to take a look at the god-awful website, which is known as everydayfeminism.com. And, or gender or non-gender binary specific being or whatever. The first article we were going to take a look at here is 5 alternatives to taking your spouse's last name. It sounds like it could also do well on a website such as BuzzFeed. Okay, so many people take their spouse's last name when they get married, and there isn't anything wrong with making that choice if it's the right one for you and your partner. Thank you for the permission, as usual. Many women, yes, even feminist women, choose to take their partner's last name for many varied and complicated reasons. And I like how varied and complicated reasons links to yet another article that says pro-choice. Beyond because it's just what you're supposed to do. These can include being more easily identified as a married couple, which I imagine would be the most common one, rejection of a family name after history of abuse, an attempt to create a new identity to escape a stalker. That's a new one on me. Or maybe they just don't like the name they were born with. I guess that works too. I'm not really sure that's a good reason, but it's a reason nonetheless. The problem is some people don't know that they have other options. I'm just curious how this is really a problem. Okay. The suggestions in this article are speaking largely to the experiences of women who are in relationships with men, as the traditions and customs I'm providing alternatives to are particularly strong in these relationships. Oh, here it comes. However, as not all marriages are between men and women, marriages with different gender configurations, it sounds like a setting in the options on your video game, may have different relationships to these traditions and customs. I hope people in all kinds of marriages can benefit from these suggestions. And if you have any of your own to add, feel free to let us know. Yeah, in the comments below, unless, of course, your comment doesn't happen to fit the narrative being presented, in which case you will be blocked. Where the tradition comes from. As women, it is ingrained in many of us from a young age that we are to grow up, get married to a man, and take his last name as our own. I mean, there are traditions that you could argue are ingrained in men too, so I don't really know why this is necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. Well, I like how they preface it up there with, oh, this doesn't necessarily apply to just men and women, or we acknowledge that there's more than men and women that get married. Yet here we are in the very next category, and they're making it sound like this is a worldwide customary thing. Where's the acknowledgement for differences in culture here? This norm stems from a long-standing tradition where a woman was quite literally considered to be the property of her husband. When a woman got married, her ownership was transferred from her father to her husband, and the change in last name signified that. Although we've thankfully moved beyond those days, the assumption that women must still take their husband's last name is still rooted in these patriarchal customs. Didn't take long to get to the patriarchy. And accepting them without a second thought can perpetuate the oppressive narratives they are predicated upon. Right. And to be fair, there are a lot of women that do they'll say flat out on like dating profiles and whatnot, they'll be like, you know, in order to talk to me, you must be this educated or be at this stage in your career or whatever. So there is some truth to that. Yeah, no, that just means that smart women apparently would just rather ignore people based on arbitrary things like degrees, which, you know, it's important for your career, but I would argue it's not important for a relationship because you can easily have somebody that will treat you well that may not be the most educated person on earth. And if you are truly, you know, an independent woman, confident in her career and, you know, doing things for yourself, I would argue it shouldn't really matter what your partner is doing. If they're a janitor and they're, you know, working hard, what difference does it matter? Like, what difference does that make? Oh. Oh, I totally screwed up the broadcast. All right. Well, I know what we did wrong. I'm going to have to hang up here and try to get you on the other thing. Damn. Okay, let's see what's going on here. I've got to find the invite section because, like a moron, I used the wrong damn thing for the inviting. So now that I screwed up what was otherwise a good podcast, I can remedy that situation. I'd like to thank the chat for pointing that out. Okay. I can't believe I did that, but it is what it is. So, all right, I've sent out the proper invite, and hopefully we can get that fixed. Okay. Well, let me just see if I can actually get the direct link. That would probably work better, huh? I stopped the screen share by doing that, but I guess I can easily start it back up. Okay. And back to the screen share. All right. Well, since we can't really, I guess maybe I can reread this one part. And okay. Well, I figured out what I did wrong. That was pretty stupid on my part.
Yeah, I forgot to ask about that earlier.
I totally wasn't thinking. So, all right, since we obviously can't go back all the way to the beginning,
let's go back into the beginning.
If you remember about what you said here with the whole women must take their husband's last name being rooted in patriarchal customs and accepting that without a second thought, can perpetuate the oppressive narratives. I believe you said something about the MRA and MGTOW stuff.
Oh yes, what I was saying is that the common belief nowadays, and I guess among the main reasons that men are uh, avoiding marriage is because they are feeling like they're becoming property. They feel like all they are merely a tool for women to get material wealth, and there is some validity to that. I mean, there's validity to the idea that a man can see his wife as a piece of property, or nowadays a man can see his husband as a piece of property. You know, all of these are more based on the psychological attitudes of the individual. But of course, individualism is not important in any situation ever. So it's all a blanket statement in this day and age. But
Well, the thing that's funny to me when we say individualism is that you've got schools, you've got society, you've got these movements, feminism, and all that. They'll encourage individuality, but the actual people that are the outliers are basically treated as outcasts. The people that are really being themselves and not speaking to a particular narrative, and they're just living life the way they want to live it. Those are the real outcasts, and oftentimes they are made to feel like crap for doing that.
exactly.
So individuality it's a nice thought, but it's the way it's present in society is extremely hypocritical. More than sexism. Here we go. The best part. Beyond its messed up sexist roots, there are many more issues that come along with the assumption that a woman should take her husband's last name. I don't think that it's really an issue unless the specific woman that is in the process of getting married has some sort of problem with this, in which case it would be for her and her husband or future husband to discuss beforehand and figure out a proper solution for. To start, the assumption is incredibly heteronormative. It assumes that all women marry men, and that just isn't reality.
Unlike this article, which is totally not heteronormative at all, even though it's only been talking about women taking men's names.
Oh,
I'm sorry. They did mention the options menu and Contra Patriarchy Edition.
the gender configuration section.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the thing that bothers me about this, and this is even something that, I don't know, I've even noticed on places like Tumblr and all those kind of progressive websites, where they'll be talking about a very specific issue, but they always have to make it clear, like, well, we might be here acknowledging this, but please don't think that by us saying this, we're writing off the existence of all these other identities. Who in their right mind reads something like this and makes that assumption? I don't read an article on gay marriage and think, well, why aren't we talking about straight people? I mean, could it be perhaps because you wrote an article about gay marriage? Just seems like common sense to me.
Looking at something with a specific name and topic in mind, and then being concerned that it doesn't include things that are irrelevant to that topic, well, color me surprised.
So when marriages exist outside of heterosexuality, it creates a litany of issues. Who should take whose last name? If you don't take your partner's last name, is your marriage less valid in the eyes of society and the law? We
get to yet another problem that I see with this. How is this a specific issue with heterosexual relationships?
Yeah,
wouldn't this be applicable to any marriage?
Yeah, now that we've crossed over into intersectionality here, I don't understand why it just doesn't make sense that we're going back and forth. Well, okay, this is a man and woman issue, but now we're getting into this is a gay marriage issue. We also cannot ignore the power that names wield. The power of Christ compels you. Historically, Names have been used as a powerful tool to oppress and erase marginalized people. Oh boy. I think we're giving a little bit too much credit to names and words here. I would argue that words and names only have as much power as you give them.
So how does that reflect the days of, since at the very end it talks about uh, black people? How does that reflect the era of when Africans, West Africans, took other Africans as slaves?
Well, that doesn't exist. So, because we all know the U.S. invented slavery.
Of course, there was no slavery before. There was
Oh, let me.
no anti-Semitic slavery, or there was no Jewish slavery or anything like that. Just
I read through this earlier, and there was a specific line where they threw in. Oh, well, let's get into black people here. Black people were also often stripped of their African names when forced into slavery. Do you even really need to state this? I mean, let's think about this. If you have a group of people that are willing to enslave another group of people, do you really think they're going to stop and be like, hey, buddy, what's your name? Let me learn how to properly pronounce this. No, they're going to call him Billy, Jimmy and Bimmy, whatever. It doesn't matter. They're not going to care about your name.
And here's the other problem that is a clear example of did not do the research. Once again, in West African civilizations, when they took the other Africans as slaves, guess what they did? They changed their last name. They made them have their last name, so they became part of their family essentially and their genealogy.
Yeah, that I guess
So
it's
they were
not important.
stripped. They were stripped of their names. Why isn't that a problem? Why aren't we talking about that? Other than the fact that 0% of people even understand the history of medieval West African civilization.
The history of names for people of color is even bleaker. Indigenous Americans, in particular, were forced to take on anglicized names as a systematic tool to erase their own identities and force their assimilation. Uh,
Indigenous Americans were also forced to take Spanish and, in some cases, French names. Indigenous Americans includes Native
yeah,
Americans from Canada
Canada.
and Mexico.
So, once again, not completely uh, perpetuated by white people.
Yeah, we need to get that Mega Man 4 Game Over song in here. So we need to make that a soundboard for Narrative Destroyed.
Okay, let's see. As communications scholar Sarah J. Jackson explained in a blog post discussing naming politics.
Well, that's
Naming
valid.
politics. As a result of the stripping of identity, culture, and family that was a primary characteristic of the American slave system, the
Or any
majority,
slave system.
right? The majority of African Americans have no knowledge of their original family naming traditions.
How would they?
Um,
There's also the additional problem of West African cultures traditionally did not have written alphabets until very recently. The Yoruba people did not have a written alphabet until sometime after colonialization. So I think mid 20th century is when they started actually having a written form of language. In fact, their history was all it was
it's
all
like
done
word of
orally.
mouth, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was all, they had specific people called griots, and their position was to be the people that told the history of their people. Now, when those griots are gone, and when they don't, when uh, that cultural feature element does not persist,
Yeah,
can
the history dies out. You lose a lot of your. I mean, you lose part of your culture, really, if you don't keep the word spreading, which could happen for a variety of reasons.
right. The for example, we could argue that the prevalence of the internet has allowed a lot of cultures and traditions to go away simply by virtue of the fact that we no longer are required to interact with people directly, and therefore we don't, and so we
Right,
spend all our time.
on the internet, and that would completely erase people that are not prominent on the internet or don't live in a society or a village that even has that capability.
And the other issue there is that you have all these corporations jerking themselves off over we need to appeal to millennials, and that's the generation that is perpetuating this nonsense.
Which is ironic because they also happen to be the ones that spout off the most about social justice issues.
Right, and they're the ones that you're going to say, in their early 20s are going to say we want to live in an urban area to experience the culture, only to eradicate the culture that they are trying to consume. And nobody ever, and you hardly hear anybody complain about those types of situations. And that can, using their own terminology, that can be cultural appropriation, because those people were there before they were, but now all of a sudden they need to have these independent coffee shops that are, I can't remember what the term is, but they're basically ethical coffee, whatever the term is for the ethical.
Oh, for
uh
the growing process and the
yeah,
harvesting and whatnot.
yeah,
Unlike Starbucks,
yeah.
I thought I heard there was some kind of backlash with the Starbucks practices, but I don't remember exactly what it
there
was.
there was an issue with, I think they had with their sourcing, but who knows.
Didn't you know that
I,
the internet is a series of tubes, meaning Mario must be the most famous internet celebrity?
I'm sorry, I don't know who this Mario guy is.
Okay, let's see.
I think you mean Maria, trans his
Oh,
trans
right, right.
woman
Yeah,
persona.
Mario is a dead name. We don't speak of that here. And that I know I'm getting a little bit off topic, but I had never even heard the term dead name until I saw that video, the Tumblristas video from Common Filth. It's just amazing to me that they come up with these stupid words and terminology for everything. And then when you call them out on it, on how it's not like a real thing, they're like, "Oh, so you must only use words that were picked from the dictionary of truth or something."
Man, that sounds like an item that I'm going to get in this game.
Okay. On the flip side, changing your name can also be hugely positive. I see a typo here. It should say be a hugely positive experience that allows you to take control of your identity.
S-class caliber writing there, Allie.
Like when a trans person changes their name to match their identity.
But why do they need to change their names to match? Why is a name associated with an identity?
Why is a name being viewed as a gender specific thing? I thought that gender roles were a construct, a social construct, and that you know things like this aren't actually gendered. It's just been ingrained in us by society that it is.
Narrative destroyed.
A name change not only changes how the world perceives you, but also allows for folks to show the world how they want to be perceived. Okay. These things all show us how tremendously powerful names can be in shaping our identities and how people perceive us. And as feminists, many of us want to explore our options before we decide what we should do with our own. Here are 4 alternatives to taking your spouse's last name. I thought this was a
There
list
were
of
5.
5. Perhaps another typo. I don't know. These people can't keep it straight. Well,
Well,
here,
math is a tool of patriarchy. So, the set of integers is just really a tool of oppression. So,
well, they don't teach that in
why do we even have sets of numbers? Why
they
can't
don't teach that in gender studies.
No,
Uh,
no, I don't think so.
Numbers are fluid, and therefore they don't actually hold any true meaning.
Which is actually that's what mathematicians they already have made that argument before.
I think 5 is identifying as 4 today. That's what's going on here.
Okay, so
Transnumerical.
so I'm gonna play Mega Man 4, and you guys will figure out which Mega Man 4 I'm talking about.
Proofreading is also apparently a tool of the patriarchy.
Well, yes, it's proof, which is part of logic and reason, and
Okay.
and mathematics once again.
I love the very first one here. Keep your last name. That's number one. The most obvious thing on the planet is just to not change your last name. About here come the statistics, and I don't know how valid it is. About 50%, 57% of Americans think women shouldn't have to take their husband's last name. So of course, just a little bit over half to make that point just a little bit more valid, showing how much more acceptable this has become in our culture. That's a very culturally centric view, because once again, what are we talking about? Are we talking about worldwide? Are we talking but now we're back to America. So, which is it? Because in the beginning of the article, they make it sound like, well, this is marriage and this is how it is worldwide. But now here we are, 57% of Americans think this.
So I don't know what kind of troglodytes read Everyday Feminism. I have to assume they must be pretty stupid if they haven't sat and thought about, if they haven't already considered that as an option, and they needed somebody who doesn't know the difference between the numbers 4 and 5 to tell them that one option if they get married is to just keep their last name. So, but I'm going to assume that people at least are able to get some kind of juices flowing in their brain. And if they really sat and thought about it, I'm going to assume that they have the ability to read. And so I'm going to get to that later, but I just want to kind of establish that right now, that I'm hoping their readers have at least some form of intellectual capacity to already make that determination.
Which might unfortunately be giving them too much credit. All right. So there are a multitude of reasons why you might just leave your name as is, and those include, but we should probably say not limited to, because you want to be inclusive. Having your career tied to your name, like writers, journalists, and artists. Okay, I mean that's valid. You could also hyphenate, which is going to be the second option here.
You could also keep your last name. You could also just use that
Yeah, you could use your
as your
last
name.
name when you write. I mean, there is a such thing as aliases and whatnot. Strongly identifying with your current surname based on its familial ties. I mean, I guess that could be valid. I mean, let
But
me
but,
say,
but I thought it was about men who had power in their names. So now we're saying that there are women that can have powerful last names.
interesting how that works. Your last name reflecting your heritage.
Once again,
Yeah, I mean, that same reasoning could work on that one. Really liking the way your name sounds. Is that even necessary?
apparently, if they have to present this as an option, they're shooting for bottom of the barrel. But I'm assuming this is really just kind of preaching to the converted, and they're just trying to they're trying to validate their own assumptions.
Yeah, I can't really see anybody that falls outside of the narrative reading this and thinking, hey, this is actually, really quality writing. Not liking your spouse's last name, which that should be offensive, because you can only imagine how it would be viewed if it was a man saying, I don't like your last name, change it to mine. Wanting to avoid the hassle of getting new identity documents and accompanying paperwork, so laziness.
And that's the big thing I want to keep in mind towards the end. That one part especially.
Okay. You're a teacher and your students know you by your last name, because, never in history has there been a teacher that came into class and said, hello, boys and girls, even though that's oppressive. I got married over the weekend and you will now know me as Mrs. So-and-so.
And it's not like if you're ever in university, they ask if your name has changed. Please come and see me, or please come make an official note of it, or something like that.
Being fed up with the sexist roots of taking your spouse's last name. Because all men that want you to take their last name are obviously doing it out of deeply sexist patriarchal values. It couldn't possibly be that they want to share, their name with you, a deeper relationship with you, as a symbol of the union.
And should we go to Africa and start complaining about the sexist roots of identifying identifying an individual through their mother? Because I don't want that kind of matriarchal society where somebody says, "Well, I'm the son of whatever my mom's name is." I just find that very sexist and offensive and oppressive.
Well, see, they don't actually want to go to Africa. They just want to talk about it when it's convenient for them to throw it up in other people's faces.
Right? They wouldn't be bothered to actually go to that backwater place.
And let's even go further and say they often misrepresent the facts about it. So it's really just to push a specific agenda, and I really don't feel like they actually care at all. They just care about their own little worlds.
What are you talking about? Hashtag Coney 2012.
If your last name is an integral part of how you think of yourself or who you are, there is no reason why you can't keep it. Once again, thank you for letting us know, because we, as adults getting married, couldn't possibly figure this out for ourselves. 2.
The supposedly educated aren't educated enough to make that deduction on their own.
Step 2, hyphenate your last names. This is another option that has become fairly acceptable in common culture and can be a great compromise in the name-changing debate. I didn't realize we had a debate, but if
Donald
there is
Trump
a debate...
he was in Iowa a couple of days ago debating that.
Really?
No.
Oh, I was about to say. I wouldn't even be surprised, although his argument would probably be just build a wall and keep the women outside.
And something about Muslims.
It's getting to the point where things are getting so ridiculous, I might get to fall for just about anything that somebody might tell me. But as I was saying, since this is a debate, please be sure to point out any logical fallacies that they may use during said debate.
Feminism is for everybody.
And they're also saying fairly acceptable in common culture. I remember hyphenating, being around for quite a long time now.
Yeah,
This is not new.
I knew of a few kids who had hyphenated last names, and like I said, in Latin America, they don't hyphenate it. They just add the last name to they. I think she said they both add it, but at the very least, the woman adds his last name to her last name, so that when they have children, they take
on
both last names.
Yeah. You will hyphenating the surnames of you and your spouse allows for the best of both worlds by ensuring that both of you get equal representation. Are you kidding me? It must be so difficult to walk around with this mindset that you have to try to get this so-called equal representation in each and every single thing you do in life. Because what is unequal about if you agree and you want to get married to someone and you don't mind taking their last name, how is it inequality? Where are you being harmed?
What they will do is they will say, well, they will tell women that they just don't understand. They need to educate them on how they're oppressing themselves. They're internalizing the misogyny.
You also will both be able to retain any professional connection to your work. You may otherwise have to worry about it if your name undergoes a major shift. I don't personally see that as big of a problem as they're making it sound like. It just takes a couple of announcements or changes, or like we said, if you're a writer, you can just write under the same name. It's not against the law or anything.
That's another thing I want you to keep in mind there.
Okay. And here's number 3. Take your spouse's last name, but keep yours as your middle name. So basically the Hispanic culture.
Yeah, which that's not their middle name because they still have a middle name.
Yeah, so technically they end up with like 4 names. I guess that could get kind of long, but.
Yeah, it does. And that's why usually when they become U.S. citizens, they usually have to select one last name for the purposes of federal, or I guess American requirements.
So basically what's happening there is they're being assimilated into the systematic tool of oppression.
Right.
They don't do it by choice because they actually want to start a life here or anything.
Right. Same thing in Japan, though. If you were to become a Japanese citizen, then you have to give yourself a Japanese name.
I've heard that's extremely difficult to actually do.
Oh yes, the process is very difficult to
That
do.
like even when you're a citizen, you're almost not in a way. I don't know what the law behind it is though.
Well, when you're a citizen, you are a citizen legally speaking, but culturally speaking, if you don't look ethnically Japanese, you're not a citizen.
Right.
So if you're a Brazilian, but you came from Japan, they might look down on you, but they still look at you as Japanese. But none of that counts because Western society is the only place that is oppressive to anybody. But yes, what you're talking, it sounds like what you're talking about is with the Koreans. The Koreans are not treated as citizens, even if they were born, if they were Japanese-born Koreans.
Mm-hmm.
That very term itself implies that they are not treated as citizens because it's inherently saying they're Koreans, not Japanese.
Right. Again, this is another practice that is fairly common and accepted. Some even call it trendy, and of course, we have to link to yet another article. In fact, even Hillary Rodham Clinton opted for this. Keeping your own last name as your middle name when you get married is said to be something of a Southern tradition, which, of course, is yet another article link to Southern etiquette in weddings. That allows family names to live on even when marriage stands to eliminate them. I like how the articles on this website, it just seems like it's a collection of links to other articles. And they just kind of throw it in. Like, oh, here's a hyperlink. Here's a hyperlink.
It's
So
it's a very masturbatory view of their own ideology.
It's also saying, please educate yourself because I can't be bothered to write an actually informative article.
Ever.
Typically,
No, I think what that is that's their way of answering the citation needed. Yeah.
Typically, this could mean dropping your current middle name if you have one and adopting your maiden name in its place. But you could also have two middle names if that's what works best for you. This can be a great option for those wishing to maintain their own sense of identity, who are also concerned about future children having different names from their parents. Okay, so here's the thing about marriage. I would say that when you get married, obviously you love someone enough to take that step, but I'm going to sound all traditional in saying this. Your identity becomes a part of another person, or at least that's what the union is supposed to symbolize.
Hence union.
Right. So to me, that's just common sense. Like you may disagree that that's what marriage is actually about in this day and age, and I would say you might be correct. But for people that actually care about each other and care about the title, this is what makes sense to them.
And the other problem with that is they talk about differing names without ever once taking into consideration the reality of the matter of that the marriage to divorce ratio is 1-to-1, which means that if people divorce and they remarry, their children are going to have different last names anyway.
Yeah. Okay, it can also allow you to keep your own professional identity in the mix if you're in a profession where your name is well known or your body of work is attached to it. I'm pretty sure I read that like 5 or 6 times in this article already. Much like hyphenating your last name, this option allows people to still recognize who you are at a glance without making a big formal announcement that you'll be going by another new name entirely. Once again, laziness, and once again, that was a very redundant statement because I pretty much just read that in the prior sentence. And here we are at 4, which is not the last one, even though we were told there's going to be 4 steps. Have your spouse take your last name. We don't see this happen all that often, but men can take the last name of their spouse too. For all the same reasons a woman should consider whether she should or wants to change her last name, men should consider it too. Now, I like how that's bold.
Because men read this. That's actually a funny thing. There's several people, including me, who, if I were in certain social situations due to my wife's last name and her family heritage and history, they will not call me and they will not call my family by my last name. They call me by her last name.
Interesting.
Even though she
Legally has yours.
well, she voluntarily decided to do that. She did not like the idea of keeping her own last name or hyphenating it or anything like that. So she decided to take my last name.
And wow, it was her own choice. It's almost like she had agency in the relationship.
Yes, but maybe she just internalizes the misogyny.
That's probably the reasonable explanation. Now, this does leave many men feeling nervous. Thank you for, telling us how we feel about these sorts of things, because all men are the same and they all feel the same about the same issues. Since this isn't common, there is some stigmatization around the practice. Some men who have made this decision say that reactions, and they got another citation, I guess, that reactions from family and friends to the news included a lot of jokes about their masculinity being at stake. And I would imagine there probably are a lot of those. Somebody would be like, oh, what did you do? Trade in your penis? And, stupid things like that.
The issue, though, that I've had that a lot of men I know that have done that is my problem is a lot of them are very sanctimonious about what they do. As if I should reward them for what
For doing
they do.
that?
Yes. And therefore it's only natural that they're going to get backlash of that form because they're automatically getting defensive about it before somebody even says anything.
Yeah. They have a preconceived notion of what the reaction will be when, to be quite honest, I couldn't care less what you do with your last name.
I mean, it's not me, so have at it.
I mean, of course, you do have those stereotypical guys out there that go around making all those jokes about being somebody being a guy that actually cares about his girlfriend or his wife, and they'll automatically go to the "oh, you're just whipped" joke, which is
ball and chain.
Yeah, extremely old and tired, and everyone knows married people don't have sex, blah blah blah. Which to me just says they don't know anything about marriage, but whatever.
Or how children are made.
But if it's right for you and your partner, don't shy away from it. Once again, more convincing. However, it's worth noting that the law isn't quite as hospitable to men changing their last names when they say I do as it is to women. Just 6 states, Georgia, Hawaii, Iowa, Massachusetts, New York, and North Dakota, allow for men to make the switch in the same way women can. Georgia, that's actually a surprising state on that list. Because I know, I thought in the South we were all regressive and not open to new things.
Did they destroy their own narrative?
I think so, because they were just referencing Southern weddings up there and whatnot. Also, elsewhere, changing your surname is considered a separate legal act from marriage. I mean, if it was going to get to that point, I would probably say don't go through all the trouble. But, I mean, if it's something you really want to do, whatever you got to do to make yourself happy.
I would, well, yeah, I'm about to get to that in a minute. But,
all right.
but basically, I don't know of any place where it's not already a separate legal process. I'll just keep it at that for now.
So we do have a 5 after all, even though first we were told there was going to be 5, then we were told there was going to be 4. Now we're back to 5, excuse me. And that is make a new last name together. So before I actually read it, I'm going to say that I actually kind of think that in theory, hypothetically, this is kind of a cool idea. But It's almost more like something you would do in a video game than in real life. Perhaps the most extreme, or maybe just creative option, is to collaborate with your partner and choose an entirely new last name. I honestly didn't even really realize that was an option.
But if they're complaining that you have to go through a separate legal process, normally you.
Yeah, I can only imagine what kind of hoops you'd have to jump through for this. This could mean a lot of things, including starting fresh, blending your two last names together, or picking a name with significance to your one or both of your families, so they could do the fusion process, the fusion dance, and fuse their two last names. In a
Or
blog,
wear earrings. Maybe that'll be the new wedding band.
in a blog post, feminist activist, oh boy, and blogger Brittany De La Cretas, I don't even know, wrote that she and her husband picked an old family name together. Choosing a new name together symbolized our moving forward as equal partners who are forging a life together and becoming a family. It allows me to subtly spread my feminist ideas just by living my life the way I think it should be lived. So, if you're living your life the way you should, you think you should be living it, I don't know why that is considered a feminist idea. Shouldn't it just be considered your individual take on the situation?
No, it's feminist and it's MGTOW or MGTOW.
There's a union that will never happen.
I would be curious to see what kind of self-implosion would happen if it did, though.
I think I would actually kind of like to sit back and see that. Our names say a lot about who we are and where we had come from, even though people argue like stupid things like, oh, well, my name sounds too ethnic on applications, so I get overlooked for the job. And they say, well, you shouldn't judge based on somebody's name. So either the name says a lot about who you are and where you come from, or it's just a small hint at what your ethnicity might be. I mean, the name doesn't speak for the entirety of your being. So it's no wonder that taking your spouse's last name has become a controversial talking point, both within and beyond the feminist community. I don't know if I'd call it controversial outside of the community, because I don't really hear that much talk about it. In fact, the only time I really hear it brought up is when the feminist viewpoint is brought up.
Yeah,
I think there's.
I don't think MRAs would ever really talk about it because a lot of times their solution is simply not to get married.
Right. And then you've got people that just care about relationships and not oppressive narratives and just decide what's right for them on their own. They don't sit there and overanalyze and overthink it and say, well, if I take your name, I'm internalizing my misogyny, so we can't do that.
Or a misandry, or if I'm getting married, then I'm internalizing the misandry.
And although we have many options, bold text, it is also important that we don't judge or shame anyone's decision. After all, if feminism is really about choices, which it isn't, then you should be able to take your spouse's last name if you so choose without ridicule. Well, that's probably the only thing that I will really truly agree with in this article, is that just shut up and let people do what they're going to do, because ultimately somebody else's marriage doesn't really affect your life.
But of course, that's disingenuous, because if that's really the case, then this article is totally superfluous, because that's all you had to say. You didn't need alternatives. Why would you need alternatives unless you were against the idea?
Yeah, you just need to do the Kotaku Patricia Hernandez style of article writing and just write one sentence with a big image or a link to an irrelevant video.
Are you sure? Well, if that's a 7-second video, I don't know if it's the Patricia Hernandez approach.
That's true. It's their right, and we don't need people to abandon their right to make that choice just to legitimize our cause. But
thank you for being condescending.
Yeah, but we do owe it to ourselves to consider our options. Oh my gosh. All right, so you had what a couple of points, and I think one was about considering law.
Yes. So here's the thing. I actually looked this up when I got married because I was curious as to what the process is.
Who knew that an adult might do research before, taking that step?
Exactly. So when I looked at it, if you want to change your last name, you have to make the effort to go and change your last name. Otherwise, your paperwork and everything does not change. All that happens is when it's time to file taxes and when you need to get a marriage license, you just establish that you got married and you put that you're married on your taxes.
Yeah,
So
that's true. Actually, the actual signing of the marriage certificate doesn't change your name, so you do actually have to go out and do it all separately.
so it's inherently like this is an inherently stupid article because to change your last name, you would have to go through a separate legal process no matter what. So then if you're going to have to change your name and it's a separate legal process, then if he decided to change his last name, all he has to do is go through the name changing process. So it doesn't make any sense for them to make this claim. So
Because it's
uh,
arguably the very same process.
right. And so you could do nothing. So anybody with half a brain, if they're actually looking into what they need to do, they can just say, oh, well, if I just don't do anything, then I'm keeping my last name. So that's the default in the US. That's the default result is you keep your last name. The alternative is changing your last name. So to say many people don't know is ridiculous because you would have to go through a separate process to change your name. So wouldn't somebody with some reasonable level of intellect just says, "Well, hey, what happens if I just do nothing?"
Yeah, and that also takes away the whole, oh, it's rooted in patriarchal values, because how it's not an automatic process anymore. You don't automatically sign your daughter away to her husband and her last name changes. No, the woman goes out, she goes and files her own paperwork and changes her name. There's no
So
guy with a gun to her head saying, get down there to the Social Security Administration and get on this shit.
and to the DMV or DPS as we have, and go in there and change your driver's license.
Yeah. So in order to even do that, the woman has to have the option to take action.
Not to mention, if the two of you were to have children, the names on both of the names for the parents are going to be their birth names. The woman or man, whether they change their last name or not, will never be their names will never be on their married names will never be on there. It will be their birth name every time
Mm-hmm.
because it's a legal document and they need to be able to legally tie it to the original name of birth. Somebody can always change their name, and that's how they look at changing a last name, as a name change. And so they go by the name that they had when they were born.
Oh boy. Okay, so here's a comment. I don't know if it irritates me we have to spend just as much debunking feminism as we do creationism. The job of a skeptic and atheist is never over, is it? Um, I feel like far too often people conflate the whole feminism and creationism thing, and being being a religious person doesn't, in my view, doesn't always imply the lack of being a skeptic. You can be a religious person and still be reasonable and acknowledge that there is a place for science.
No, you can't. It's impossible. There's nobody ever that's ever been like that.
Oh damn. I forgot all those Christian scientists that actually discovered things don't exist. My bad. I found the next article we're going to have to look at. We just have to, because the title alone is ridiculous. 7 things to remember if you're a white person dating a person of color.
Now this is interesting because I've been on the opposite side of that coin. So I'm curious to see what they have to say.
Yeah, this could prove interesting. I just feel like it's going to be one of those things where it's like, you're white, so you need to realize that your white supremacy could very well overtake this relationship if you're not walking on eggshells. But let's see if they actually are reasonable about it and prove us wrong.
Well, the second paragraph already is wrong, but we'll talk about it when we get there.
Okay, I haven't even seen it, so let's see. I'm currently in my third interracial relationship. So is this like a thing that you do on purpose to be progressive, or it just kind of happened by accident? I mean, either way, I would actually argue that if you're doing it for that first reason rather than just something that happens organically, you're the idiot in the situation, but whatever. That is, unless you count my first boyfriend, Jose, who in the second grade, long distance called me from Puerto Rico and got me in a lot of trouble with my dad. Then it's my fourth interracial relationship. Wow. This very young, progressive white girl.
So there is my first problem. Uh, as far as the U.S. is concerned, Hispanic is not considered a race; it's considered an ethnicity. So a Hispanic person can identify as being white, black, multiracial.
Okay, so oftentimes I see race and ethnicity kind of used interchangeably as though they're the same thing. So what would you say is the exact difference?
The the difference I would say is ethnicity has more of a cultural tie to it, which is why I think it's odd that we only consider Hispanic as the only recognized ethnicity on federal legal documents, and no other ethnicity is concerned. Because Hispanic to me simply represents a culture, a history, a long-standing history of indigenous and colonial era miscegenation, among other things, and I think I guess religious syncretism and everything like that that has reflected a society. I don't really understand why there's a push to address that. Well, I kind of do, because if I meet a person from Mexico,
Sure.
they would be offended if I did not see them as white. And as I said, I've been on the other side of this situation before, and in their case, they don't see it being they don't necessarily see it being different when you are if you're a Mexican man or woman and you date a white person. Sometimes they, like I said, sometimes they consider themselves to be white, and then you have others that consider themselves to be black. Particularly in the Caribbean, um, you will find Hispanic blacks there. They are Hispanic by due to their culture, but they are
Right. So
racially
so
considered
what
black.
so what Hispanic really represents is people, not necessarily the color of their skin, uh, based on where they're from.
Right.
Because it could be a multitude of different countries. You got Mexico, you've got what, Spain?
Well,
Does that fall under there?
Spain doesn't fall under Hispanic, but there was a different type of miscegenation there.
Because
And
I also
in the
hear,
Middle Ages, they were called Moors. They were basically there was North Africans and Spaniards
right, because I
were
also hear the
mixing.
term Latino used quite often.
Right, and that's more based on preference. Some prefer to just be called Latino and not Hispanic. I haven't met anybody that prefers that, but that's because over here you'll find more overwhelming Mexicans. So that doesn't make as much sense to them as it would perhaps in a place like Puerto Rico or something like that.
Okay. Oh, well, here we go. And while interracial dynamics always add a layer of work to romance, it's important to note that I'm white. First of all, by saying it adds a layer of work, all relationships require work. So if you're talking about the simple act of getting to know a person, where they're from, their background, their life, that is something you deal with regardless of race.
Right. And while I was in that situation, I had to understand the culture and the upbringing of the person I was dating. But
Right.
even when I got married, and that's not interracial,
You
I
still
still
have this aspect of
right.
having to learn about what the family's traditions are and trying to find a way to assimilate yourself into that while being able to keep your own identity and also, making everybody happy and making sure everybody gets along. So to me, this is just relationships, and they're kind of making it, well, I'm white and this person is this, so it's a little bit extra work. And maybe you could argue that is true, but I would almost argue that in situations like this, it's usually the opposite race or ethnicity or whatever you want to call it that is less, slightly less accepting into the culture of, say, like a white person, let's say, trying to get into a relationship with an Asian woman. The parents are in general not always so open to that, and there's this degree of having to prove yourself as a worthy person for their daughter based simply on the fact that you are not from their culture. And I'm not necessarily saying that's wrong, but what I am saying is that there's a double standard where if you've got the excuse, well, oh, that's just their culture when it's a non-white person, but when it's a white person's family, it's always, well, it's because they're racist. And I'm not trying to say that doesn't happen, but it is a double standard because in the end it comes down to the same thing, a
Well,
difference in race and culture.
they would end up being racist no matter what. And while I'm totally curious as to where you got that hypothetical example from, I would know I would say from what I've seen, it's even more difficult if, say, you are a black man and you are dating an Asian woman. It's
Oh
even
yeah.
more difficult in a situation like that.
Yeah, I've
It's
read some horror stories about that.
it would lead to the same kind of racism that you're talking about, that apparently does it's okay for them to be racist with a situation like that.
Yeah, and the thing I kind of hate about that is it comes from, it obviously comes from stereotypes. It comes from the fact that these people don't have the exposure to actual black people. They have the exposure to the very one-sided narrative of what a black person is supposed to be.
Right. And so it can be a difficult situation, and I feel sorry for sometimes the children of black and Asians, especially the children that make horrible Netflix movies about being addicted to sex. But we won't talk about that.
Okay, so here's the exact line that I knew was going to happen. Because when you're a white person in an interracial relationship, there's this whole, oh, white supremacy thing hanging in the air. So I've got a real big problem with this kind of thing because it goes back to that whole white guilt thing where simply because you're white, even if you've never treated somebody of another race as a lesser person simply because of their race, you are guilty by association just because of the color you were born. Unless you are a card-carrying member of the KKK, which
Or
in
live in
that case,
Delaware County, New York.
yeah, in which case you wouldn't be in an interracial relationship in the first place. There is no white supremacy aspect to the relationship. You are not in the same sense that the person that you're dating does not represent all black people. You do not represent all white people.
Hashtag not all white people.
Exactly. And that has to be acknowledged and dealt with constantly. Well, I'm sure that makes for an amazingly fun relationship. Lest your relationship be doomed and your "no, really, I'm a decent person" card be permanently revoked. Oh.
So, was there supposed to be a complete sentence there?
I guess so. I mean, I guess that was apparently the sentence. I don't. We talk a lot in social justice circles about how to attempt to be a better white ally to people of color, and a lot of that allyship 101 advice, oh, there's another new buzzword, can and should be directly applied to our intimate relationships. Why? Why
So
would you go into a relationship with somebody of a different race and treat them differently based on their race? You treat people the way they would want to be treated, not the way you perceive them to want to be treated simply because they have a certain skin color. That to me sounds racist. Because
Didn't we already like didn't they already show like demonstrate this in 90s sitcoms? So I'm sorry, they were problematic back then. So that was the problem. My other problem with this is there's a word called alliance, and so I don't know why it's allyship 101.
well,
You
we
got
got to be trendy and start new terms just
oh,
for the hell of it.
okay, all right.
But I think it's worth revisiting these concepts within the context of romantic or sexual relationships because they're special, and the way we practice our allyship in those contexts should reflect that. So you're telling people how they should conduct their relationships based on social justice issues which may or may not be relevant to these particular individuals. So whether you're years deep in a charmingly fairy tale-esque romance with your beau, or
Which
you're
means your relationship is going to last for another 25 days at best.
I'm surprised they didn't say with your bae, or you're just now firing up to dive into your first, here are 7 things to remember as a white person involved with a person of color. Because this list is totally not a condescending way to put every interracial relationship into a collective little box and label it the same. You know, that is in no way marginalizing or talking down to.
Well, let's see. Maybe they can provide some insight. Well, for me and maybe it can give you some insight on maybe some things to do or to try next
Next
time.
time around. All right. 1, be willing to talk about race. As a feminist and a woman, I could never be in a relationship with someone who didn't feel comfortable talking about patriarchy. No, I think what you couldn't feel comfortable with is being in a relationship with someone that doesn't talk about patriarchy as if it's an everyday aspect of modern society. In fact, I often joke that my go-to first date question is, what's your working definition of oppression? Oh, you must be so much fun.
Oh, I don't know. It probably would be it would probably be going out of your way to write an article about 7 different ways to mind your P's and Q's when you are a white person dating a person of color, which was never a term I liked. I thought it was condescending and offensive, but
What happened to that? Who knows? Gender and the social dynamics therein is a part of my everyday life, both in how I'm perceived by the world and in the work that I do. What does this have to do with the race aspect? So if I tried to date someone who felt discomfort to the point of clamming up every time I brought gender into the conversation, which you probably don't need to do because you insert it in various places where it doesn't belong, that it's not you, it's me discussion would come up quick. Oh, so you mean the cop-out, dishonest reason for breaking up with someone.
yeah.
The same goes for race, in which we link to yet another article, which I'm not going to bother clicking on because we're not done with this one. While it's okay for conversations about white supremacy to make you uncomfortable, hey, we should be uncomfortable with that shit, being generally aware of how race plays out and feeling fairly well versed in racial justice issues is important. If you stop looking at your relationship as an expression of emotions between 2 individuals that care about each other and start looking at it as a social justice issue where you constantly have to acknowledge the so-called problematic aspects of it, how long do you really expect that relationship to last?
35 seconds.
That's approximate, folks.
Oh, I'm no mathematician, but
And as for the whole making you uncomfortable, that implies that the only reason why anybody might not want or might have an argument against the white supremacy narrative is simply because it makes them uncomfortable. And that is, quite frankly, bullshit, because white supremacy is not a prominent aspect of the country. It's a piece of it, but it's not like you've got the KKK running the government.
Well, maybe not all governments.
Yeah.
But, but yes, the issue, as far as I could ever see it, I've actually felt that racism was just a convenient excuse to kind of hide the reality of the matter, that it feels like uh, economic class is really what things boil down to. Because if it's a wealthy person, and then wealthy people all kind of look the same, it's a convenient phylum to file everybody into, that's part of the not wealthy class.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a social status thing that comes into play that a lot of people don't acknowledge, because there's many black celebrities, and some of them get away with some unsavory things simply due to the fact that they are famous. You've got O.J. Simpson. How long did it take for him to actually be arrested? And it's still not actually for the the worst crime that he committed. So there is a certain level of leeway based on how famous you are.
But let's not consider that, because
Maybe I should also stop and say I completely acknowledge the fact that there are many white celebrities that get away with various crimes. Because, I wouldn't want to sound racist. Okay, so where are we? And that starts with recognizing that you do, in fact, have a race, and that your whiteness, and whiteness in general, plays a huge role in how race relations play out socially and interpersonally. Perhaps for people that sit around and think about their race all day long. Me, I go outside, I meet different people, I talk to different people, I'm friendly with different people, and as long as they are a friendly person, a nice person, I'm going to be kind to them, because to me, it doesn't matter what you are, it matters who you are. See, seems like common sense, but perhaps my whiteness has me doing it all wrong.
well, you're just looking at things ideology. You're not looking at the practicality and the reality of the matter, which is something that they never do, except when it's convenient for them to look at it. And so,
I mean, I do realize that I'm a person, that's probably not of the typical behavior of that society promotes, but and I do look at things idealistically from my
what
point of view.
you mean,
So
you don't impregnate three different women?
no, unfortunately. So I do realize that when I speak about these things, I'm speaking from my point of view, probably putting a little bit of an idealistic spin on it, because that's the way that I believe people should behave and treat each other. Now, regardless of whether or not that's more prominent, we can argue about that, but I can only speak for myself and my experiences. So to me, to put a label on this and say whiteness is wrong, because it simply implies that everybody that could be considered white behaves and acts the same way, and that to me is no better than the opposite, where it's wrong to say people of other races all behave the same way. You can't generalize in the same way that you don't want to be generalized. It's a double standard, it's hypocritical, and you can argue that, well, I'm oppressed so it's okay, but that's never sat well with me, and that's probably because of my internalized white supremacy.
So, are you going to be doing the tractor pulls in your white hood anytime soon?
I think I'll pass on that, but I guess the option is there if I decide to convert. And it continues with understanding that being able to talk about race in a conscientious way is an avenue to showing love toward your partner. I mean, that would depend on the partner. I think some partners might take offense to the fact that you are constantly looking at them as some sort of other that you need to walk on eggshells around.
Yeah, you can. There, you can definitely be too conscientious, and in my opinion, and if you keep trying to And once again, that goes back to what I was saying. Like, wasn't that a big thing back with '90s sitcoms where it was all like, "Oh, well, I don't know how you feel because you're a different race, so I forgot I need to check in with you to see how you feel about that before I have my own opinion." And
Yeah,
of course, the joke was usually that they
it was
had,
probably mostly the same, or
yeah,
not too different from the viewpoint. So being honest about the ways in which race is complex, both inside and outside of your relationship, shows a willingness to engage with a part of your partner's identity and experience in a way that really holds them. Now, this implies that you are with a partner that identifies so strongly by their race that it's something that's prominent in like everyday conversation with them. Some people don't tie themselves so strongly to that aspect of their identity, and they're just like, yeah, well, I'm black, or I'm this, or I'm that, and sure, but this is who I am as a person, and it's not necessarily because of my skin.
but looking at individuals, who does that?
And I mean, I have to admit, we've got all these in jokes, and I'm actually living in a place where I hear people say some very unsavory things about race on a daily basis. And so in those circles, I'm basically considered the social justice warrior, because I'm always having to tell them, what are you guys, retarded? This is not normal. I mean, you can't sit there and say you've had a bad experience with one person who is black and then paint the entirety of them as terrible people, and then get angry when on the opposing side you've got, like, say, this Dylan Roof guy, and everybody's all like, oh, those white people. If you're going to uphold the double standard, don't be angry when it comes back on you.
Yeah, you have to accept that the backlash is going to come, and
And given the shit that I talk about on YouTube, I think it's amazing that I could even be getting to a point where I have to, like, argue in defense of that narrative, because to me, that what they're perpetuating is the actual racist narrative, not this bullshit that comes from Tumblr where it's like, oh, you ate a burrito, so you're a racist for appropriating Mexican culture or something.
even though burrito is not necessarily even Mexican food.
Well, we can safely ignore that because Taco Bell and whatnot.
Narrative destroyed.
Okay, so number two. I can't believe we've only made it to number two. This is actually, I guess it's just there's so many things in here that they're saying that are just so stupid that you have to stop and go on a 10-minute diatribe about why it's dumb.
Especially for somebody who's actually gone through this, and I can say obviously there's going to be some point where you bring up the race situation, but I don't ever remember a time where it was like, oh well, I have to say this to you because you're black, so she had to address me a different way to make sure that I was okay with something. It was just it was
Uh,
just regular converse. Well, regular for the time.
I mean, yeah, my general rule of thumb, when not really knowing the inner workings of a person's personality, is, treat them like a person, an individual, and eventually you'll learn their stance on these things organically. It doesn't necessarily mean you can never bring it up, but to walk up to someone and be like, "Hey, nice to meet you. I noticed you're black. How do you feel about this?" That just seems a little weird.
Like, I notice you're black, so can you please tell me how you feel about
The systematic oppression of the white supremacist government or something.
like, first of all, I'm going to tell you to get out of my face. Then second of all, if I don't look at you, if I'm not the one looking at you crazy, there's going to be plenty of other people looking at you crazy. But I have actually had that happen, but not in relationships before. But there have been people that look at me as though they expect me to be the authoritative source on,
The arbiter of the black community.
right.
I could see
Like,
where
so
that would go.
how do you feel about Al Sharpton?
It's like probably close to the same way anybody else with half a brain does. The dude's an opportunist.
Like, there are plenty of people I know, even other people, other New Yorkers who do not have high opinions of other Black New Yorkers who do not have high opinions of him. And that's exactly why they said, oh well, my friend was gunned down and murdered, and we didn't have all these hashtags, and uh, there were nobody lighting all these vigils for this person, but then this one person does something, and all of a sudden it's a grand sweeping problem in black and white relations, or black oppression once again.
I was actually going to wait more towards the end of the article, but I guess since I have it on my mind, I should probably touch upon it now. And it comes back to the whole looking like the social justice warrior in the circle, in my circle of, well, I want to use the word friends for a lack of a better term, but some of those people I don't consider friends.
Their only friend is metal.
Their behavior actually kind of pisses me off. Not only because it's actually ignorant and hateful, but also because it gives ammunition to the people that take it to an extreme degree. So it's like, yeah, here I am on YouTube, poking fun at the extremes of social justice, but that doesn't necessarily mean that since I make fun of that, I don't realize that, there is a time and a place where there are situations where stuff is actually screwed up and actually racist and needs to end. It's not mutually exclusive,
But
even though many people tend to paint it that way.
but it's too hard to solve those kinds of problems. We need to just go and
Go,
argue in the comment section.
go after the low hanging fruit. Okay, as a woman, I know that sometimes talking about gender with a male partner, even if he's well versed in all things feminist, can feel exhausting. Sometimes I don't want to chat with someone who only has a theoretical understanding of gender oppression. Sometimes I want to talk to someone who just gets it. That's why. So basically, you don't want to talk to someone that actually thinks things through and questions. You want to talk to someone who's going to spout the same ideas back at you. That's why safe spaces, one of the dumbest terms ever, where affinity groups can be together without the presence of the oppressor, exist, so that tough conversations can be had with fewer guards up, so that you can communicate thousands of ideas in a single collective sigh, so that you can cry together with those who don't just sympathize but empathize. Once again, blind agreement. They don't want any room for their ideas to be challenged or to learn something new and maybe view things in a different way, but yet they want to be able to talk to you and have you shut up and just listen.
Well, because they're infinitely smarter, and unfortunately, my only problem with that is that's the only group I know where they think simply because they have a certain label that they're somehow smarter than everybody else.
Hashtag atheism. And while it's important to be willing to talk to your partner about race and to feel comfortable bringing it up, it's just as important to be willing to step back and recognize when your whiteness is intrusive. Okay, so talk
How
talk about race and feel comfortable bringing it up. I mean, that could like mean literally anything. Does this mean you're asking something about their specific culture that they're a part of?
but people can be legit. It's so I'll give an example. It was cultural appropriation, so I apologize to nobody for doing it. When so I had to do some work related activities this week, and I had to do them a while ago, and I noticed one of my coworkers was talking to. We were getting lunch, and I guess the people spoke Spanish, and I guess she was trying to practice her Spanish, so she ordered what she wanted in Spanish, and so since I usually practice because I have a coworker. I had a coworker from another job who is Mexican and speaks Spanish. So, whenever I talk to her through, instant messaging or anything like that, it's always in Spanish. And so I decided to appropriate my coworker's uh, uh, attitude, or do what she did, and I went and also ordered in Spanish as well. It wasn't appropriation for her because she's Hispanic, so it's okay for her, but it wasn't for me. But they were pleased to hear that I was actually speaking the language and I was trying to speak it properly and try to understand things.
You
And
know, and that's something that I've come to realize more often than not. The people that are actually a part of the culture, they are usually so ecstatic to see somebody interested in learning, and they're willing to share it. They think it's a great thing. So what pisses me off is this narrative where with cultural appropriation you can never do anything from some other culture. The thing that pisses me off most about it is that it deters people from learning, and with learning comes understanding. So if you want more people to be accepting of your culture and respectful to it, wouldn't you want them to learn about it properly instead of
and
just
that,
saying you're not this so you can't do this?
and that's the other thing is like I'm a big Lusophile, particularly interested in uh, Brazilian Portuguese, especially. So I've been learning the language and learning especially the culture of Brazil, but also other Lusophone countries. And uh, one of the things I noticed about people that Brazilians would say and other people would say about Brazil is they really are impressed with people that want to understand their culture, and that's part of their culture is to appreciate people that want to learn more about them, even even for their xenophobic behaviors. There's a similar thing with Japanese people where even if somebody is not speaking the language correctly, because they're trying to speak it, they're very pleased with it. And as somebody that speaks both of those languages, I there have been several occasions where I'll go speak to that person in their native language, and they're a lot happier just that I'm actually taking the time and effort to learn, and they're actually trying to help me understand the how to make the language sound more natural. So they're
Yeah,
not, because there are some cultures where if you try they'll just respond in English because they don't want to educate you. You
right.
educate yourself. But then those are cultures where they actually appreciate that you're doing it, so they try to speak with you so you can improve yourself, which is probably what this article is supposed to be trying to do, but it's failing in every sense of the word.
Okay, and part of attempting allyship, once again, this stupid word, is understanding that sometimes your partner just needs someone else right now. We need a replacement word for allyship so that whenever it comes up in in sentences in this article, I don't have to speak it because just saying it drives me up the wall.
Uh, Camaraderie.
Okay, so, and damn, it's easy to be hurt by that, especially in a culture that sells us the toxic message that we should be everything for our partners.
No,
So,
everything.
yeah, I refuse to. so, so now it's toxic to be a supportive partner, to want to be there for someone through all steps of their life and supportive and loving and all of that. Now, I understand they're probably what she's probably saying is here is to acknowledge the abusive, controlling aspect of that, which there could be a very fine line, you could probably argue. But to me, if two people are on equal grounds, they love each other, they support each other, they want to share everything with each other, that's their prerogative, and it's not necessarily because of society and culture telling them that they should. Because I would argue that today's society and culture says everything but that. You've got this whole sex positive, and it doesn't matter how many people you sleep with.
And
Do what you
robots are
want, but
okay.
yeah, do whatever you want as long as it makes you happy narrative that we're going for. So bullshit on being everything for your partner, being the prominent message. I admit
And
it.
in this situation, I haven't been the one to say this. Well, let me rephrase that. I have been the one to say something like this, even though it's I'm the one that they're supposed to be trying to make sure that they remember to address these seven things. and it was actually due to the fact that they they were hurt, but they didn't want to let it in. It took at that time, I think it took the rest of the school day to even figure out what was going on because I was a teenager at the time, and just to come and find out it was just because some kids of her own race went and said something about her to me, and
Mhm.
me being me, I told her to introduce me to those people so I could inform them how I feel of that, and especially because they found it necessary to wait until I was gone to say that to her instead of saying it to me,
Naturally.
and she did not want to do that for some crazy reason. She didn't like the idea of me doing that, but uh, it was difficult because it was just she had closed up and she didn't want to let it in. So it wasn't even because of something that happened to me because I didn't care. You say whatever you want to say. If you don't sign my check, I don't care what you have to say to me.
I admit it. I've been there. I've been the but I love you and you love me, and why can't you share this with me? White partner, because that's something only white partners do. Because it's
Yeah,
really difficult to
please
watch.
disregard the example I just gave.
Yeah, let's not pay attention to that because it's really difficult to watch your partner hurt and not be let in. That shit is hard. But remember, that isn't necessarily about you personally. It's about an entire complex web of an oppressive system. All right, I can't take anymore. Um, what she's saying here, the whole "I love you, you love me, why can't you share this with me?" First of all, that's not a colored issue. And second, that's what relationships are about. Now, you can argue that depending on how long you've been together, it takes time for people to open up about various aspects of their life.
5 years.
But eventually, if this person wants a meaningful, deep, healthy relationship with you, they should be opening up to you. They should be sharing with you. That's how it works. I mean, if you're going to keep things from each other, if you're going to keep each other at bay and not share with each other, there's no sense in even being in a committed relationship. It makes no sense.
And yet, there are so many people who do that who are in committed relationships.
Yep. But, you know, I'm not supposed to tell other people how to live, so I better just go back to my oppressive system. But it's also about the fact that you represent that system by virtue of your privileges, whether someone's deeply in love with you or you're a complete stranger. You know, I hope if somebody is deeply in love with you, they realize how retarded it is to look at you by the color of your skin and say, hey, you're white, you represent the KKK, I can't share this with you. That is ridiculous. And if somebody looked at me like that, I could tell you that the words get bent would be in my vocabulary very quickly.
That we need more of that KKK representation.
Because I will have all the sympathy for you in the world if you come to me with a legitimate problem. But if you're going to accuse somebody of something that they have not committed themselves, then you're the one that needs to learn a thing or two about life. And when you do make this about you, you're contributing to that system by prioritizing your own hurt feelings over your partner's need for space. That's a very convenient cop-out response, in my view. There is something to be said for people that will do whatever they can to make every problem and situation about them. But given what you just said above this, I would think that they would have every right to be upset about being treated that way. Because if it were the reverse, which is what you're speaking out against here, you know, you would call that racism and oppression and all those other things.
In a heartbeat.
So instead of feeling hurt, ask them how they'd like for you to show up and recognize that sometimes giving them the space they need is part of loving them. All right. So once again, I don't think that giving a person space is a interracial relationship based thing. I would also like to say that sometimes people use the I need space cop out to avoid having discussions. And so while it may be important to give someone space to say to cool down during an argument so things don't escalate to a point that you might regret, it's also important for the person that claims they need space to recognize that this could very easily turn into a manipulative situation where this person will say everything they want to say to you, and then when you speak up and respond back in a way they dislike, they right away close down and walk away and say, I need space. It turns into a very one-sided situation, and that to me is unhealthy and potentially abusive.
But you're a man and you don't know anything about abuse.
No, nothing. 3. Well, we're getting there. Familial relationships might
We're
not
already
feel,
getting to one of your favorite things in the first sentence.
yeah, familiar relationships might not feel so familiar. Of course, it's never appropriate to stereotype people, but combinations of culture, nationality, and religion do play a huge role in how our families are structured. That's not necessarily a stereotype. It's a stereotype is like, okay, this family is black, so they must all be thugs listening to rap music, and things like that. This is recognizing that based on the way you grow up, your religion, your background, there will be different traditions within a family that are going to feel foreign to you, and that's not necessarily a race thing. It can be, but it's not entirely. White people very rarely have to think about this because we're considered default Americans.
Unless you were to date somebody who was Irish or something like that. So I didn't realize that all white people were default Americans.
And apparently all white people are lumped into the very same category.
Right. There are no different types of white cultures and nationalities and religions or non-religions for that matter.
Well, didn't you know that white people don't come from different countries? They all come from Whitetopia, and they came over on the SS Whitey.
Or was it the RMS Whitey?
What that means is that our understanding of American culture and American family is whitewashed to the point that we can forget that not all family structures operate the same way, also making the implication that all white families operate the same way. Because, all right,
whitewashed. I got it.
Here's one that I can speak on a little bit through experience that I won't entirely get into, but let's
20
say
years of experience that you have there.
Yeah, let's say in a specific culture, it's customary to remove your shoes before you enter the house. Now, here was an assumption made about me because I was white, that this was not something customary to me, but I was raised to always remove my shoes when I come in the house. So this is something I was already aware of. To me, it wasn't a cultural or racial thing. It was simply common sense. To me, it seems rude to walk into somebody else's house with dirty shoes.
That actually was an interesting thing. I had grown up the same way. So I remember when they would teach us about Japanese culture, I was like, you mean there are people that don't do that?
Yeah, it's just like, you mean being polite? Like, what? And now, granted, I know quite a few people that don't take off their shoes when they enter a home, and I'm not. To me, it's a matter of upbringing, so and preference. So, narrative destroyed, I guess, and especially in romantic or sexual relationships where one, both, or all of you have close ties to your family, remembering that families function differently culture to culture is a must. I think also remembering that families function differently from individual family to individual family is a must. Maybe it isn't appropriate for your partner to take you home to meet their parents. Maybe it isn't even appropriate for your partner to talk to their family at all about their dating life. Or maybe your partner has to go through almost a coming out process around dating someone white or outside of their culture. And that goes to the whole double standard we were talking about earlier, where if that were reversed, it would be considered highly racist. So let's see. There was definitely something I wanted to touch upon in here. I think it had to do with the whole individual aspect of families. Now, you can say that in general, a specific culture will practice these traditions, but I also think it's very presumptuous to come at it where just because a certain family fits under that culture, that they necessarily practice all the traditions and values that come along with it. Because there are plenty of people that will cherry pick certain aspects of culture that they agree with and then ignore the aspects they don't.
But is that fair? I thought we were all just supposed to accept these other cultures, and we were supposed to accept it as is and take it for the good and the bad.
And while you're not required to stay in a relationship where you feel like your own values or needs are being compromised, it's important to question why you feel frustrated when things have to be different or difficult. Well,
that's exclusive to interracial relationships.
Yeah, and when those things are based on assumptions about someone simply because of their race, I would say that is your favorite word, problematic. Because are they really, or are you creating a default of whiteness and punishing your partner from deviating from that norm? My advice, talk about family stuff on one of your first few dates. That way you're both clear on what you're getting into, and you'll have already opened the conversation for discussion later. So basically...
What if the person does not have a close family and doesn't want to talk about the family dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, and usually that in an organic date setting where you're discussing things and getting to know each other, these things will just have a way of coming up on their own. At least in my experience.
Well, let's look into the next thing.
People close to you are going to say racist things. Speak up. Well, that's actually, I mean, that's probably true for some people. I didn't experience this, probably because they know I would punch them out. But
like Mike Tyson?
Yeah, that's not me acting logically or reasonable. So I'm just letting my toxic masculinity speak.
You're not using that good old Descartesian deductive reasoning there.
Yeah, I didn't take the time to point out their logical fallacies. I just went straight for the jugular. Oh, I love my family desperately, but it's been exhausting constantly explaining that they shouldn't call how do they say that? Latin X or
I typo people.
Yeah, I mean, because it's supposed to be Latino, but they stopped using the O for some reason.
Because of it could be Latino or Latina.
Oh, are you serious? Do they really just like try to get around the gendered aspect of it? That's sad. So we're gonna call it Latin X because to me it reminds me of like a video game boss, and I don't care if that's how they want to pronounce it. That's what it is. So call Latin X people Spanish, or that no, my partner doesn't celebrate Christmas. I think it depends.
Or in this case, my partner does celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, because don't Spanish people do that?
Yeah, they
Okay, so I think this depends.
Well, some do. You know, we're talking about Europe. That's the epicenter of logic and reason. So
right,
they celebrate convenient excuse to
give each other presents. Yeah,
yeah.
All right, so I want to say that this is probably it might not necessarily come from a place of racism. It could come from a generational gap, upbringings where people are kind of just ignorant to the practices of different cultures and religions just because it's not something they're experienced with. They're not necessarily trying to be offensive, but it might come off as pushy or I guess ignorant.
Some could be based on preference. Like in New York, I've heard New Yorkers refer to Latin people as Spanish and not Hispanic, not Latin. Hispanic is something you might hear here, or if you're a racist idiot, everybody's just Mexican to you.
Yeah.
But in New York, it's the other way around. Everybody's just Spanish to you.
And so the other thing that I want to touch upon with this is she's talking specifically from a white narrative, which isn't representative of all, but they don't feel the need to preface that when it comes to white people. But what they're doing here is they're making it one-sided because in my experience, when you enter an interracial relationship and you get involved with a family, regardless of whether or not you celebrate the things they celebrate personally, you find yourself involved in those traditions. And this is more about being respectful. So if a family celebrates Christmas and you don't, and you're involved with the family, in general, you celebrate Christmas because you may not necessarily care about the holiday, but you care about the people. So you join your partner, you celebrate with him or her, or the non-gender binary being you decided to partner yourself with, and you take it for what it is. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to adopt it as your own, but you're present and you're respectful of it, because that's just something you do when you're in a relationship.
But being respectful is I don't know, that might be problematic.
Whether it's your well-meaning family or you're supposed to be socially conscious friends, sometimes people are going to say or do things that are fucked up, and it's your job, both as the partner and a fellow white person, to say something. What if you don't want to consider yourself as part of this so-called white community that you have created here? What if you just want to be yourself and you don't really care about the narratives being presented on either side, and you just care about treating people that are good people with kindness and respect? But I guess that's just erasing identities and perpetuating systematic oppression and all those other convenient excuses
That
for not treating people
it's
as
toxic
people.
whiteness.
Exactly. They're your loved ones, so you probably know what will work best for them, but in my experience, generally turning their mistake into a teachable moment will be more effective than just whining, "Mom, that's racist." And okay, wow, there's actually a sentence that is sane in this article. That's actually probably the best way to go about it. If somebody truly says something that is awful or maybe insensitive, the best way to go about it, which is not the social justice way, ironically enough, is to tell someone why it might be hurtful or offensive, rather than yelling at them and ostracizing them and telling them they're a racist instantly.
And that you're not going to educate them on why they're being racist.
Yeah, because you can't be bothered to take the time to point out something that is apparently so obvious, yet you can't give a clear example of why it's a problem. Let them know why what they said is harmful and hurtful. Bust some myths. Give them a little history lesson. Offer them some alternatives. Send them a useful YouTube video. I would argue, please don't do that. But make sure that you
Just
actually
don't read
address
the
it.
comments section.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care what side the YouTube video is coming from. Please don't link a YouTube video, because more often than not, it's speaking to a specific demographic, and it's going to be a little bit biased because of the audience that they're speaking to. And talk to your partner about how they want you to react, especially if they're present. So here we go again with treating this person as though they are a representation of the entire community. Be like, oh, well, how do you want me to act if this comes up? Should I yell at them? Should I? No, why don't you react the way you want to react? And then later on, if you two feel the need to discuss the issue in private, you do that. And then maybe next time around, there could be some kind of suggestion offered about, how it could be handled better, or better yet, let your partner speak for themselves. If they're, truly in a situation where they're offended and uncomfortable, maybe they could address the situation in a respectful manner and try to educate, for lack of a better term, these people, and maybe offer a different perspective. And, it's possible that somebody might even learn something in the process.
And usually you can be able to tell from context, and I know that context doesn't matter, but you can tell from context, what is offensive to the other person and why it would be offensive.
I would,
So even if you don't know, it's easy to just use your common sense and figure it out.
Yeah, and I could also say that the context thing is another important aspect, because the people that are so-called saying the so-called problematic things, if you look carefully enough, you can usually judge whether or not what they're saying is coming from a place of blind hatred or a lack of knowledge, or maybe it's just their personality to be kind of forward and not really walk on eggshells. Be sure. Yeah. Okay. Wait. What did I read? Oh, do they want you to be the liaison, or would they feel more comfortable speaking for themselves? I guess I already acknowledged this. If they're cool with you taking the lead, what exactly do they need you to say? So they're going to write you a script even though they told you to take the lead? Will they want some alone time afterward, or maybe
But
some
this is
time?
everyday feminism, right? So wouldn't the partner, perhaps the partner would be a man in some cases? So wouldn't that be patriarchal oppression?
It would. Will they want some alone time afterward, or maybe some time to debrief with you? What is this, Metal Gear Solid? And how can everyone move forward as a group? How can? Oh my God, this sounds like an intervention. Be sure to put your partner's wishes first and recognize that sometimes that means that you're going to have the tough job of setting your loved ones straight. Okay, so number 5. This is moving slowly but surely. And don't call me Shirley. 5. You are going to say racist things. Own up. Oh boy. Oh wow. I'm in the middle of rewatching Degrassi: The Next Generation from season 1,
Rewatching.
episode 1. Yeah, because once wasn't enough. And I've developed this habit of asking my partner, if I just dropped something, if he'll do things with me based on what's happening on the show. Will you do coke with me? Because Craig and Manny are. Would you bid on me in a date auction? Because Wesley wants Anya to. It's become a joke. This is a really odd inside joke to be sharing, and I'm not sure I understand how it's relevant here.
Well, at least we can say it's some kind of joke, and it's not just right wingers. So
Cue the
a little bit extra credit for them. So D plus.
Cue the 2-part episode when Sav's parents arrange for Farah, the woman they're hoping he'll marry, to be in town when he's supposed to take his white girlfriend to junior prom. Now cue to my "Are you going to get arranged marriage to Farah?" text message and his "No wait, are you asking me this because I'm brown?" response. Oops. I was pretty sure I understood his tone as joking, and I was also pretty sure he knew that this was another ridiculous Degrassi question, but I still knew that I had to own up to that mistake and apologize. Why? This is what? Because whether I was joking or not, and also whether he was, it's not cool to make suggestions with racist undertones. So acknowledging aspects of that may be general of a culture is racist. I mean, anybody with common sense would recognize that somebody making what could be perceived as an off-color joke, which I would argue that this is really a stretch labeling it that. Anybody with half a brain knows that when you make a generalization, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's your actual belief. It's used for purposes of humor. And although it's definitely easier to brush it off with a "babe, you know I'm not racist, I was just kidding" response, that's actually never the appropriate answer. Okay, that's never the appropriate answer.
Lol, JK, not real racist, dog.
Because as white people, we've been socialized racist, whether we like it or not, and whether we believe it'll play out in our love lives or not. And as such, even a joke can be rooted in some really fucked up, deep-seated beliefs. Now, what about, I mean, this doesn't really even acknowledge people that are of another race and make these kind of jokes with each other. Is that offensive? Is that wrong? Is that racist?
But what if somebody has that kind of sense of humor where they
Because
make
I know
off-color jokes?
I know people that make jokes about their own race on a daily basis. Are they racist? Is it internalized racism?
Well, I certainly don't make those kinds of jokes.
No, not at all. So understand that sometimes you're going to say or do racist things, and be ready to take responsibility, apologize sincerely, and have a plan for how to do better going forward. If you're an actual racist, for one, like I said earlier, you're not going to be in an interracial relationship unless, of course, you somehow.
Well, if you are, it would be on the DL. You would
Yeah,
be.
yeah, or you somehow have taken them as a slave. You're not going to care that your behavior is racist because you're racist. So
You might be a racist if.
the people that actually have the sincerity to apologize, I would argue that in general, these are people that don't have a racist mindset.
Or do they?
Well, I guess that's questionable now. It also, it really depends on the individuals and the dynamic of your relationship and what you are okay with joking about and not okay with joking about, and that's really something you have to learn about anybody you date.
But
But
who has time for such minor issues like that?
and I would argue that a relationship could a good sense of humor in a relationship could do wonders for your connection. But what do I know?
Yeah,
Powered,
I
powered,
don't, I don't think I agree with that one.
power dynamics don't magically disappear, not even during sex. Oh my God, are we really
Well,
going there?
we know who put that entry on Urban Dictionary on masturbation.
Is this okay? So we're going to talk about power dynamics, and before I even get into reading this crap, you're a white woman, so you're also a feminist that claims you are oppressed based on your gender. Now, are we going to go through the oppression checklist to figure out which one of you actually has the power in the bedroom? Because you're a woman, so points off for you because, well, he's a member of the patriarchy regardless of his race. But he's of another race and you're white. So how does that work? I guess this is where those mathematical oppression equations come in.
Yeah, but for people that don't know the difference between 4 and 5, I wouldn't put too much faith in their.
Yeah, their mathematical skills are to be brought into question for sure. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories, especially from women of color, about white sexual partners saying all kinds of horribly racist, exotifying things in the bedroom without checking to make sure it was okay first. Well, perhaps they've just dated some really freaky people. And it's kind of weird that they just, I don't know, randomly share these things with you, but that's cool, I guess. From demands to speak Spanish to me, to straight up hurling the N word the way one might baby in the heat of the moment, it's clear that not all white people understand how to show basic respect and humanity toward their partners of color. So what about that whole post I recently posted on Twitter from Reddit with that whole we're a white couple seeking a black man to dominate my wife? Doesn't that give the power to the person of color?
And perhaps to the wife, because
Yeah, because her husband is a complete mockery.
he's an eye mockery.
Indeed. It's important to remember that as a white person, being sexual with a person of color, you're in a position of power. The fact that you're intimate with one another doesn't erase that. Or you could come to an understanding that being intimate with a person comes with a certain level of respect and trust in one another. And if you're, I argue that if you're going to share these acts, you need to be able to have discussions about it, open discussions, honest discussions. So, I mean, this just seems silly to me. I'm sure there are people out there that are entirely disrespectful of other people's wants and needs, but to me, that's not the majority. It's just a particular type of person.
And of all the things to get worked up about, the speaking Spanish to me is probably the most non of issues.
And it
Like
can be,
I thought they were going to say something like, "Oh, say massa or something," or give me some Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's or something like that. Not
oh man, and that that sounds like the script of some kind of weird, I don't know, either a comedy that's really taking that type of thing to an extreme degree. I can hardly imagine that being commonplace in the everyday life of people that are in a relationship, a committed relationship.
Yeah, like that all well even then the whole speaking Spanish thing just sounds like dumb TV stuff cuz
Yeah,
didn't that happen like in Bad Boys too?
I think so.
Yeah. This is stupid, but we already knew that.
I think this comes, yeah, like the actual racist terminology towards each other. I would feel like that would come more from people that are getting involved in these flings where there's not a lot of respect between the two people, and it's kind of just like, well, I think you're attractive and I want to get off, so we're going to sleep together. You know, they don't care about the other person. They just care about pleasure.
Yeah, when it becomes more of a transaction. Yes,
Which
Degrassi is unwatchable.
it is, yeah. Let's see. Okay. And it can be difficult for a marginalized person to feel comfortable expressing their needs without a safe space being intentionally created by the person of privilege. Do people really sit down and like look at their sex lives like this? Because this is horrible. Like, this is the most unappealing, unromantic thing I have ever read in my life.
Like, who wants to nail people to say, okay, you know, now I had an orgasm, but I think we would need to really sit down and talk about the problematic aspects of that orgasm. Now,
Right.
what you are exhibiting your power dynamics on me as a man, and I can't allow you to use your ability to get me off to control me.
Privilege in the bedroom. This is a joke. I mean, two people with more than half a brain that care about each other are not going to be thinking like this. It's not about these so-called power dynamics. You know, it's about sharing intimacy together, which is obviously something that these people don't seem to have a solid grasp of. It's like they're making it almost like a test or something. It's like that the whole feminist thing where you have to stop before every act and ask for consent. You know, it's just about the most unappealing, unsexy thing you can imagine. I
I
mean,
didn't realize we were doing sales calls here.
I just want to know, like, who could maintain an erection through something like this?
Or a lady erection, if you will.
Exactly. Just so we're not completely problematic here. All right. So the issue. Wait, what did I skip something? Okay, I've written, okay, tweeted, so therefore you know it's irrelevant, before about how this plays out even in sexual encounters where only a power imbalance exists on the axis of gender, in which case I think you really need to examine the type of people that you are sleeping with if you think this is even a problem, because once again, issues like that where you don't feel comfortable with the person you are with comes from a place of a lack of trust and a lack of just general care for one another. So, you know, to me, that's less of a privilege issue and more of an issue of you need to take responsibility for who you are trusting enough to share these acts with. But me saying that is very sex negative, so it's best to just stick to the narrative that's being presented.
And it only gets better from here.
Oh, God. The issue is this: the power dynamics bestowed upon us by our fucked up, oppressive society don't disappear just because you're intimate with someone. Actually, I would argue that they do, because society is not in the bedroom with you, cheering you on. At least they shouldn't be.
But you know, if you're on the Reddit personals, you know,
Yes, get cucked, damn it. I'm just like, I'm blown away that they've even managed to turn sexual encounters into arguments of privilege and power and oppression. And I mean, because to me, truly a truly oppressive sexual encounter would be actual rape, not the I regret it the next day, but the
or the my brother was talking about that girl rape,
yeah, sex
or my,
isn't.
my mom called somebody a whore rape.
Sex is an incredibly interesting aspect of relationships, particularly in the ways that power is distributed. While generally this is understood in terms of tops and bottoms, I'm pretty sure that's a gay
Yeah,
terminology.
I was about to say, did you even test this article out before you released it?
Which, by the way, can also be subverted. It should be considered in relation to social power, too. Oh my god, so preferences in the bedroom are now aspects of social power.
Mhm.
And if you're a white person having sex with a person of color, it's paramount that you recognize that and mitigate it to the best of your ability by having deliberate conversations with your partner. Yes, honey, how can I not oppress you in the bedroom?
How can I not oppress you when I'm nailing you?
Anybody with, like just the slightest amount of reason would laugh at a question like
Logic and
that.
reason?
Because it's, yes, because it's so ridiculous. I mean, by asking the question, I think you're stereotyping them and being under the assumption that they're thinking about it like they're not thinking about you as a partner, as an equal. They're thinking about I'm about to let this white person have sex with me, so we better be careful that this doesn't become a racist act.
Now, when I insert my penis into your vagina, how can I ensure that this penis insertion is not me demonstrating my social position over you?
Perhaps they should wear colored condoms. I don't know.
Perhaps instead of it being male and female, it should be there should be primary and secondary, but then that might not work either.
Right, because the person that's secondary is oppressed by numerical order. But then again, four can identify as five, so maybe one can identify as two.
Right. So then maybe secondary is just primary.
If you only date people of color, and especially from one group in particular, check your. Oh God, I love this. This is the getting into the Tumblr area of fetishization, and I've seen some really horrible things in regards to this. There was a Tumblr post, and it was anonymous, of course, and it was a message to somebody that was half white, half Asian. And the person in the anonymous message made the claim that their existence was problematic because it represented the way in which this girl's father oppressed her mother and fetishized her.
Uh, okay.
It was the most disturbing thing I've ever read, and they had the nerve to call somebody else racist.
I don't think R9K was around back then.
Okay, so I'd love to be able to give you a formula, some kind of foolproof ratio of number of white to POC partners to help you determine if you're racist because you don't date enough outside of whiteness, or if you're racist because you too often date outside of whiteness. But such a thing simply doesn't exist. I bet it does. I don't want it to, but if you look hard enough for it, it's probably there. But I do think it's important to recognize what you're doing if you're only dating people of color, and especially from any one race or culture in particular. So to me, I think that it really depends on your attitude. I mean, yes, if you are after someone simply because of their race, that's obviously a little weird. But I think that it's rather normal to be attracted to certain features, and with that preference might come being geared to being attractive or attracted to, in general, a person of a specific race. But this goes into the area of attraction and how valuable that is to you as an individual versus personality. Because for me, sure, I might have preferences of what I'm attracted to physically and appearance wise, but I could never date someone solely because of what they look like. I have to be attracted to their personality, to their morals, to their values, and we have to share common interests. We have to have things to talk about.
Yeah, we can't just sit here and look at each other.
Right. For
Well, I
example,
guess that's what the people do in this relationship. They sit and look at each other, or they text and watch Degrassi.
and talk about how each one is, or how one is oppressing the other simply by the existence of the other. For example, I have a cousin who, to my knowledge, has only had girlfriends who are of color, and all but one of them, who was Latina, have been East Asian, and I raise all the eyebrows at that. So that's not really fair. Because what if the cousin that is in question here is very interested in that culture, or very interested in things that people of that culture are generally interested in. So, say for example, I'm going to be problematic here and say something like anime or manga. It would be easier to find things in common to talk about with someone that may be from a specific culture, simply because you are either invested in learning their language or some form of their media. You know, it gives you common ground.
And
To,
even if they didn't like it, it's it's easier for them to at least have heard of it and therefore can qualify why they don't like it.
yeah, I mean, it's a discussion. You know, it opens things up. I don't know. I think that by doing this, you are deterring people from, I don't know, it's almost like segregation. On one side, you're arguing, oh, you should date outside of whiteness, but on the other, it's like, well, in order to do it, you have to take a series of tests and walk on all these eggshells before it's, you know,
You
realize
can't
that you're not doing it out of a problematic reason.
right. You can't be exclusively interested in.
Because while it could just be coincidence or the effects of your environment, like if you're a white person living in Japan or something, who would have guessed? Considering that racial fetishization and exotification is totally a thing, I question any white person who has a thing for insert race or culture here. So why would you just question white people? Because to my knowledge, there are people, and I've seen them openly say it, I will not date anybody except a white person. I'm sorry, it's just a preference. And they are not white.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I personally, like, I don't see a problem with it. And no, it's not because I'm white. It's because I'm not going to try to force an individual to be attracted to me if they have a specific preference and they're just not going to care to listen. You know, you can't change somebody's mind. You can't force interest. And it reminds me of this article I saw a certain once friend turned SJW post that said gay white men are racist for having a preference of not dating, openly not having a preference for not dating black men. And to that I say, while some of those attitudes may be based on racism, why would you, as a black gay man, want to try to force that type of person to be attracted to you? Because in my eyes, I'd just be like, well, this person's an idiot. I don't want to have anything to do with them. You know, there's plenty of white guys out there that will find me attractive for my qualities that are not race-based.
Exactly, and that's what anybody would do in any situation. It's like, oh, that person does exclusively doesn't like black men or black women. Oh,
Right,
okay,
and you could apply that to any other preference. You know, you could say, we could go back to the whole smart women preferring a certain level of education. So they're like, well, I won't date anyone that doesn't have a master's degree. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to go out and get a master's degree just to impress you. I'm going to move on with my life and find somebody that actually values, you know, important things when it comes to love.
right. Well, because there are plenty of like CEOs and all of that that don't have master's degrees. They only have undergraduate degrees, and that's it. Because, oh, surprise, surprise, they have actual businesses to run.
Oh, this is just sad. I don't know how you walk through life thinking like this. It's entirely ridiculous and insane. So make sure that you understand your motives behind why you're dating interracially, whether it's your first time. Hint, I've always wanted to try sex with a black girl, is racist. That to me is a little weird, but it for me, it maybe not so much brings into question entirely the aspect of racism, but also this is the kind of person that obviously doesn't value sex in a relationship. It's more of just, I want to go out and try the Baskin Robbins variety of sex.
Yeah, well, not the Ben and Jerry's because that's too social justice-y for my taste. But
Something you're used to doing, hint, I have yellow fever, is also totally racist, but apparently white fever is not racist.
what if you have actual yellow fever?
Yeah, so why did they co-opt the actual disease?
That sounds like appropriation to me.
It does. You should be with your partner because they, as an entire person, are what's good for you, not because you're attracted to stereotypical ideas about them. That's maybe one line I can actually agree with. Like I said, you can be attracted to features that are typical of a race, but it's also important to be attracted to who they are as a person, which I feel like applies to the beginning of any relationship. I mean, you could date a white person. I could be white. I could date a white person based solely on their looks, but that relationship isn't going to work out because on a deeper level, we have nothing in common.
And in this day, you need as much commonality as you can get based on these narratives.
I get it. Dating is hard, and being responsible for the ways in which your whiteness affects the world and your relationship is hard work too. Well, it's hard work when you go through life looking through a microscope for problematic aspects in every single area of your life. But you know what's harder? Being a person of color in a white supremacist world. Well, you just keep telling people that, and rather than taking this thing called personal responsibility and putting it into play, they're just going to sit back and say, well, this is because I am of this race, rather than this is because of me and the fact that I need to take action and realize that there are jerks in the world, and if I need to, I can avoid them.
You can dodge.
Exactly. And while you can't change that fact for them, what you can do is work to ensure that your relationship is as safe as possible for them, because that's how love works. I think the whole "that's how love works" thing has less to do with race and more about people caring about each other based on deeper aspects of their character.
I think the worst part about this is that she had to get help from 4 different people to compose.
Oh, wow. I just noticed that.
This Shakespearean work of art.
And would it be wrong for me to assume that by their last names, they are most likely not white?
And by their first names, probably female?
Yeah.
It's probably a safe guess.
Well, that's that. I'm now completely disillusioned to the possibility of the future of a normal relationship. Thank you, social justice.
So are you gonna
go my own way? No, I don't think I'll be dealing with that either. Speaking of going our own way, oh god, this is perfect. A comment just came in from that guy. One of the MGTOW guys that they just can't stop responding on that video. Like, I've got people arguing with each other now over what MGTOW actually is, and it was one of the people that tried to talk about it reasonably, but then he replied to some guy that said, I always prefer red pill over joining MGTOW pussies. So the guy said in response to that was, MGTOW is amazing. It's all about the stories men have of how women in society abuses them. That's all that it really is. Ciao, simps. So this is somebody that previously talked to me in this very same comment section and said, no, MGTOW's not about that. It's about going your own way. So I said, what happened to MGTOW just about, being about going your own way? So let's see. He said, that's the name of the label. Being a hermit isn't going to make anyone happy. So if you're implying it's about being a hermit, you kind of missed the point. I don't know who created. I only know that the focus seems to be on how society, and I guess mostly women, abuse men, because anyone can be a jerk in a relationship. Thank you for letting us know that piece of information that I already realized. Or in a partnership, family, or parenting. MGTOW exposes and I guess even seeks solutions for troubled men, even though they claim to be bowing out of society, which by definition would mean not finding solutions for these problems. It would mean avoiding them. I really don't see a problem with these things I just mentioned, but yes, I will agree. Users like Angry MGTOW do raise concerns as to where the crowd is going. Calling feminists a female Taliban isn't my idea of useful education or point to argue, so that's pretty reasonable of them to admit. But I wouldn't call the movement divided or corrupted just yet, if it's really a movement. At the moment, it's more like a group of concerned citizens. How is that any
But they're
different?
bowing out of society, therefore they're not
Kind of,
concerned.
right. Maybe someday it will be protesting in the streets. I look forward to seeing what will happen next, as more MGTOW probably means less good men dying in wars. For those who like to sit at home, it's a new world. Great. Got to make this
Uh,
second comment. I assume this comment is a joke, though, because I already explained what I found in it as best as I could. Men don't need to go anywhere. That's really the point. We shouldn't be required to take care of women to be considered men. Where did I imply any of this in my question? Well, that's about all I can share before this starts to look like spamming. Ciao. All right, so things I didn't say for $500, Alex. That's just so stupid. I really give up on the comment section of that video, because as I go on, more and more responses come in that are just, they don't really apply to what I said. They're just kind of bringing up all these arguments that they kind of just imagined.
the only one that really just throws me off is the one that I actually responded to, where he said, I looked at this because I've been trying to look for just a solid counter argument against MGTOW, and I haven't found it. And so he's basically saying, this video was supposed to provide that, but instead it's just shown me the strength of it, but it doesn't show the strength of it at all. Like it shows comments of people. Like, that's the thing. Even the people in the comment section, if you pay attention, they've really been trying to avoid acknowledging those comments. It's like, well, those are special situations, and they don't represent us as a whole.
Which, I don't recall saying, but they feel the need to come in and defend that, even though what they're saying is that the definition of their label is living their own way. So if they're not the person saying it, I'm not really addressing them. So why are they lumping themselves in?
Because of their knee jerking to your video, and therefore they feel compelled to make a response, even though you didn't say anything against them. They have to defend what they are what they're a part of.
I think they missed the point where right in the intro of the video, I go to the definition of the word, and then I follow it up with specific people that are not following that definition. So I don't know where they come in with the, that video is anything other than pointing out the hypocrisy of people that claim to live by one thing and do another.
Maybe one day we'll find out, but I wouldn't count on it, because they're not. I don't see anybody that's really demonstrated that they have that level of. That they've been just paying attention in that much detail. It's just like, hey, somebody did this. Let's complain about it.
All right. Well, we went through 2 articles and took them apart in a rather lengthy manner. So I think that will be good for this particular stream. I usually try to keep it within the hour and a half, 2-hour time, so that people actually might bother to take the time to watch an archive. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for watching. Apologize for the technical difficulties in the beginning, which apparently closed off half the commentary for the first maybe 15 minutes or so. I'm not sure how long exactly, which is a little bit sad because it was otherwise a rather good stream. And we'll be back with another Scratchcast very soon. Next time, maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll do something a little different, get some other people on that haven't been on before, and who knows where the discussion will go.
Well, thanks for having me on this one. Pretty pretty interesting one. So look forward to seeing the next one.
Anytime. All right. Later.